was fun to see some cars back on track, to see some passing, um, and to see where the teams lie after all of the conjecture and prophesizing over the winter. Um, where did it end up? What happened?
Well, it felt like 2023 never ended, right? I mean, it was a lot of the same and a little bit of some things different. Some good things to take away from the race, and perhaps some reason to be slightly more optimistic that this season will probably not be a complete Red Bull annihilation. Yeah, I don't know. It was the first race of the year. I don't want to talk about the race, but I also want to talk about a lot of what the chatter has been and the discourse has been around the race itself and what the season might look like. So, but what did you think? How did the race go from your perspective?
Uh, so so despite having us all having a little bit of hope sprinkled on our pizza on the Thursday, with the two Mercedes topping the FP2 times, it was all business as usual again on race day. Um, the only challenge really that Max had was off the start line, but he quickly closed down the inside line into turn one, pushed Charles Leclerc wide, and then disappeared off into the distance, completely checked out. And I think even if Charles had got ahead of him, with the problems that he subsequently had, um, I think that was probably a done deal. But there are some reasons to be sort of mildly optimistic, and Ferrari are definitely one of those reasons. What did you think of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz?
Yeah, that was one of the more enjoyable things, right? The two overtakes that Carlos had was very, very interesting. I thought one of the things that was interesting was Carlos's comments after the race, which is that he admitted to having, I guess, similar brake issues to what Charles had, and he seemed to be doing a better job of it. I don't know if that was actually true, maybe to the extent that sort of Charles had his issue, but that definitely seemed like a veiled kind of, a message in there somehow, some way, right? And Carlos is very smart, very cerebral that way. And I don't think his comments were, I'm not saying that there was those were facetious in any way, but they were definitely very well placed. Let's just say that, right? But that was interesting. I think that there's reasons for Ferrari to be optimistic because they seem to have gotten over their tire deck issues. They
Yeah,
seem to be able to maintain a somewhat decent pace. I would have loved for them to pit Carlos maybe a couple of laps earlier to see if they could have really given Checo a run for his money. They might have been fighting for that second place. But then I think, and again, in the end of the day, it just seems like Max is on another planet, on another level. And while the gap does seem to have come down, I don't know that it is necessarily going to be what it needs to be for there to be, pushing Max or a fair fight with him in any which way. So
yeah.
that was an interesting. What did you think of your future team?
I was I'm a big Charles Leclerc fan, so for me the race was a little bit disappointing, but also a little bit interesting. Um, Look, I think they probably should have done a little bit better in qualifying. Um, Leclerc obviously still out qualified Carlos, which is kind of what we expect,
Mhm.
certainly on one lap pace. Um, but he needed an extra set of softs to get him out of quali one, which he shouldn't have really needed. And it meant that quali three was a little bit compromised to the point where he actually did a slower time in Q3 for his ultimate qualifying lap than he did in quali two. And we know that if he'd done his Q2 time, he would have got pole. So there was a little bit left on the table, and it's unlike Charles to allow that to happen. So that was a little bit disappointing. Carlos, I thought, drove a great race. He took his opportunities. He did say that he had similar braking issues, although from what Ferrari have subsequently said, it doesn't sound like it was the same problem. It sounds like Leclerc had a proper brake issue where there was an imbalance between
The
the
left
two
hand.
front brakes. Um, and it sounds like it wasn't anything to do with what he had done. It was a problem with the car. But Carlos took that opportunity. He made some really decisive overtakes, two of them on Charles, despite Leclerc clearly not playing the team game in that situation,
Yeah.
which is interesting because actually Carlos would have been the one that would have been put through, but you kind of think that in the situation that Carlos finds himself in, I think Martin Brundle said in comms that right now Carlos needs to be playing for Team Carlos. That actually it would have been the other way around. That if Carlos is ahead, he'd be the one that would be like, no, I'm not going to let the guy pass. But anyway, Charles put up a robust defense, and Carlos got past him anyway, and came in a decent third. I don't think he was going to be able to keep Perez behind him. But the interesting person here is Charles, because without that brake problem, that when you look back at the beginning of the race, I thought that he was just making silly mistakes, but then he made more and more and more of the same locking error into turn 9 and 10, and you thought that okay, this can't be for real. And then the radio message came up, so clearly there was something happening that was affecting his performance. But despite that, he was able to drive around it and able to get past George Russell towards the end, to get fourth. And I think Russell drove a great race as well. I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a second as well. But the main sort of complaint against George is that is ostensibly pressured into a mistake towards the end of the race. Now, would he have been able to keep Charles behind him? I don't know. Should he have been able to keep him behind him, given that he still had those braking issues at that point? Maybe. But he probably shouldn't have gone off the road and allowed Leclerc the opportunity to get past him, especially with Leclerc's problems. And I don't know if that speaks more about how good Leclerc's management of that race was, which is probably where I put it, and how much of it was Russell making an unnecessary mistake.
Yeah, I think
How
I
did,
think it's safe to say that I mean I agree with you. Like Charles did a really good job of managing, and I for at one point thought that this might end up being a sixth, seventh, or an eighth position. It seemed that bad at one point in time that he may even get passed over by the McLarens, and maybe even Lewis by that time. It kind of felt that way, but somehow, some way, he was able to kind of recoup that effort and to come forward, to given the circumstances, was
yeah,
really, really solid. And I do think, I mean, to your point, it does give a little bit of optimism that perhaps if he had been able to qualify first, maybe he can do that with a different, maybe at a different track, with tracks that generally have a little bit less degradation than the Bahrain surface offers, right?
yeah.
There could be a fighting chance. It does still feel, and I mean, if you talk to them, they will say the same thing. The drivers will, which is that Max is still so far out there. But I think we could see some sort of friendly competition for a few laps at least at the beginning, where it doesn't feel like in 7 laps in or so, Max was out there by like by 10 seconds or
No.
something. It was over. And I do want to kind of get back to the big picture of that at some point, but I think you're right. The Russell stuff is really interesting, right? And all the Mercedes, well, the Mercedes drivers and then the Mercedes engine customers were all sort of dealing with the same issues, right? Which is, the wrong sort of cooling configuration on the PU and what that meant and managing. And so I think it's a little bit hard to judge where Mercedes is at. And maybe if they didn't have those issues, they might have been right there with Ferrari. Who knows? It's a little too soon to say. Uh,
I actually do want to go back to Ferrari one more time.
sure.
The Charles Leclerc thing. If Charles hadn't had those braking issues, could he have won the race?
No. No, I mean, no. I mean, look, you it wouldn't have quite worked out the same way, right? Because just you look at how Max drove off into the distance, right? Maybe he would be catching Charles for a couple of laps, or maybe there would have been you know, a healthy fight up until a certain point. But let's not forget the fact that Red Bull had saved an extra set of softs towards the end. And I think the race would have eventually come towards him anyway. I mean, he took that first really long stint. I think both his stints, Max's
Yeah.
stints were longer. Of course, by then
He's
you
just
had the
playing
luxury
with
of that.
everyone.
Right.
Yeah, he's out the front. He's not in dirty air. I mean, he was. would that have been a different story though if he was actually in a battle? I don't know.
The only way that I think Ferrari can put Max in that situation is that we just haven't seen him be challenged, right? So I think to your point, I would want to leave a little bit of an element of doubt open to say,
Mm.
what if Max had been pushed a certain way, right? What if Charles could actually push him to use up his tires a little bit more? Because we haven't quite seen that with him yet. And we really quite didn't even see that with Perez either, right? I mean, he did, I guess in the overtaking that he did have to do, he did have to stop a little bit early. But I think for the most part, they were so unchallenged that it really wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
And then we also know how powerful the Red Bull is when they have the DRS as well. So I think that's the other
Yeah.
thing to account for. That let's say even Charles was ahead. I'm not sure that Max would really have had to push his tires as much. He could have just waited for one of those long straights to kind of get the deal done, right? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I
so
agree. I mean, I think Ferrari's tire management issues are better than they were last year, but they're certainly not on a Red Bull level,
yeah,
and certainly not in Max Verstappen's hands just yet. Okay, sorry. We were talking about Mercedes and their cooling issues. Uh,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you saw the picture of of George's W15 afterwards, with the burnt out engine cover, you can tell how hot that engine was getting, and you couple that with Alex Albon's car telling him car is too hot
cars.
during the race. Um, Clearly there were some issues, and I don't know, as you say, whether that's an intrinsic problem with the Merc PU, which is only going to get worse when we start getting to places like Saudi, where it's going to be warmer, and Qatar later on in the season. If that's an intrinsic problem, that's a big problem. Or if it's just that they um, over egged the fact that it was going to be cooler conditions during the race in Bahrain, and therefore went a bit too marginal on cooling. I don't know. Um, but the end result was that both Lewis and George were having to lift and coast a lot from quite early on in that race, and that compromised their race performance ultimately. Just talking about Lewis and George, tale of two drivers, I thought. Um, George qualified really well. I think he got the most out of the car that he could. And then in the race, I think did as well as the car would allow him to do, given the limitations of the power unit. Um, yes, I think he probably could have not made that mistake against Charles later on in the race, but I think Charles was probably coming by anyway. I don't think he was going to maintain that position, so I think George finished about as high as the car probably could. My my problem this weekend, I'm really sorry, is Lewis, and it hurts me to say it. It hurts me to say it quite a lot. And something that we didn't mention in our teammate wars video, which if you haven't, check it out, is that uh, last season and the season before, Lewis's qualifying performances weren't quite as good as his race performances, and this was stark this weekend. Now he's made the point that my setup was more geared for the race, but it doesn't that we know that actually from Mercedes, because Mercedes then came out with this later saying that actually the setup that George had versus Lewis was not massively different. It was marginal, but they weren't exactly the same. And one did favor race pace over single lap pace, but it wasn't enough to explain a
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
2.5 tenth this difference in qualifying. And Lewis was what, half a second off Max Verstappen in ninth. So there's something there's something there. And especially in a car where Lewis is saying that, look, I'm more comfortable in it now. The rear is doing what I want it to do. That's a little bit worrying. I think one of my objectives that I thought that Lewis needed for this season was to really, really get on top of qualifying and absolutely nail it, because that's been the weakness so far in the last couple of seasons. It's not been a massive weakness. It's not been like he's been dropping the car in 12th or something and dropping out of Q1 and Q2 on a regular basis. But he's never dominantly put that issue to bed between him and George, right? They were 11-11 over the course of the season last year, and George was marginally the quicker in pace if you take the averages. But if the car is going to come good, even if you're biasing towards race pace, you can't be qualifying ninth when your teammate is qualifying third, because you're not going to win a race from ninth on a regular basis, not in that car, not when the Red Bull is as dominant as it is. If you're not there or thereabouts at the front of the grid, it's not going to happen. So, and this is worrying for me also when he goes up against Charles Leclerc in 25. You know, Charles the quickest driver we think over one lap, and if Lewis is not at his absolute peak right now, is he going to suddenly find that in a new team against an even faster teammate?
Yeah.
That worries me a little bit. He did say last season that my aim is to improve my qualifying. That's the area of my game that I need to improve. By the evidence that we've got from one race, let's say, it is only one race. There's still some more homework to be done, my friend. Um, that said, his race pace towards the end of the race was good. He did start to, he got past Alonso quite easily in the end. Decent overtake from him, and he was starting to close down the McLarens, but never really got closer than about 3 seconds to Piastri in the end. And I think they had him covered. So if he'd qualified further ahead, I think that he would have been ahead of the McLarens as well. So it had a tangible effect on his race outcome. There you go. That's my
No,
thoughts on
I think
Lewis.
that's fair. I think it's fair. Get better, Lewis, and make it good, Ferrari, and then get better, Lewis, is where you're at. I get it.
That's it.
Get it.
In summary, that's it. It's a two-pronged approach here.
Maybe the two of them together can take Max down. So maybe that's where we're at. Yeah, I think that's fine. I'd like to move on to McLaren, right? Because I had
Yeah.
sort of picked them as the team that would be up there. And frankly, I was a little bit surprised that they didn't seem to be in the mix when it came to Ferrari, and I wasn't expecting them. Well, I kind of expected them to challenge Red Bull. Not that I expected them to be right there, but they seemed further away than what I had imagined. I certainly would have hoped that they would have been ahead of Mercedes. So that was a little bit of a shocker for me. I don't quite understand what that means. They tend to, do better as the season passes. But given the way the last year ended, the off season that they seem to have had, we were wondering if they were hiding something. I don't know if one race is enough to tell whether they were hiding something or not, but certainly just based on this one race alone, does leave me a little bit worried about they don't seem to be right there, and I would have expected them to be there. Now, I don't know. Maybe this will probably take a few more races to figure out, but it seemed a little bit disappointing to see them that far behind the Ferrari, not even the Red Bull.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the same caveat that we talked about when we talked about McLaren's launch is true, that they were clearly miles better off than they were last season at the same race, where one driver was out and the other driver finished 16th.
Yep.
So they're definitely better than they were there, but we were expecting more. This should take us back to one of the comments that Andrea Stella made at the launch, which is that, look, we're still slightly behind in terms of some of the developments that we wanted to put on the car, but we have more room for development. And I think that's probably a standard story across the upper part of the grid this season, that teams have got a car that is a better platform for them to be able to build on than it was last season. If that's the case, and McLaren have got some upgrades coming for the first few races of the season, then perhaps, as you say, this isn't the ultimate potential of that car just yet, and that's fine. But I agree. I was expecting a little bit more. But what was good to see was that Piastri didn't drop away from Lando. He stayed within about 5 seconds of him throughout the race. That, for me, even though he didn't out qualify him, suggests that Piastri's at least started to make some inroads into his tire management issues, which you'd expect would get better and better and better across the course of the season. And Zach Brown on the pit wall during the race did say, look, he's got it nailed now. I don't think he's completely got it nailed, but nobody can in that short amount of time. But I do think he's made some progress on that. And there is one thing just to say about McLaren in general, right, is that last year their problem had been in low speed corners, right? So in high and medium speed corners, they were great, but in the low speed corners, they clearly had a problem. And Bahrain will punish that. Turn 10 especially.
Mhm.
It's such a drop in speed from high speed to medium, and then that horrible Mickey Mouse turn 10 off camber, horrible is a tricky corner to take, and that was clearly hurting McLaren this season. But that also suggests that perhaps they haven't got on top of all of the issues that they thought that they were going to get on top of before the start of this season. And I hope that their upgrade development direction is gonna focus on improving that.
No, I think there's reasons to be optimistic, but I also have this everyone's going to improve. So the question is, can McLaren really leapfrog other teams in terms of their improvement? So to have those massive gains
Well, they did
relative.
it last season, didn't they? So
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
yeah, but they started from a much weaker base
They
last
were
season than they
so
did this
far
season. So
behind. Yeah.
yeah, so again, the law of diminishing returns is a little bit
Yeah.
against them this season. And listen, can we talk about the other works team that we never talk about?
Let's talk about it. Yeah, because that was the most interesting thing for me. And again, what happened after the race is almost more
Oh my
interesting than
God. So Alpine turned up with a car that is slow, it's overweight, it's underpowered. The drivers basically just couldn't get anything out of it in either qualifying or the race. And the only thing that stopped them finishing last was because Lance Stroll and Nico Hulkenberg collided with each other. Um, and there were other issues with across the race, including
us.
Logan Sargent. So not great. And then immediately after the race, we find out that actually their technical director Matt Harmon has tendered his resignation, and Dirk De Beer, who's been there for years now, the head of Aero, has also left. Um, so that if we just tick off the people that have left in the last 2 years, who does that come to? So I've got in front of me, I think Laurent Rossi has gone, CEO. Otmar Safnauer has gone, team principal. Cyril Abitbul has gone prior to Otmar Safnauer. Alan Permain has gone, sporting director, who's now been taken up by VCARB. Pat Fry has gone, previous technical director has now gone to Williams. Um, Oscar Piastri oops, there is. Oscar Piastri has gone to McLaren, the development driver. Um, Fernando Alonso, their lead driver, has gone to Aston Martin.
Awesome.
And now Matt Harmon, technical director, and Dirk De Beer, head of Aero, have also gone. Who is left?
Yeah.
Can I just say, right, that we're all talking about the ongoing saga that is the Red Bull Racing Formula One team. This,
Did
if
you
they
not?
if this team were at the front of the grid, it would be box office news right now because the entire team is imploding. But it's a self fulfilling prophecy that they will never be at the front of the grid because this is always happening to them.
I'd like to issue a public apology to Haas because at the beginning of the season, I called them losers, but I would like to issue that apology and rescind that loser title and firmly place it on the crown, such that it may be of Alpine, which is just an epic disaster of all proportions. Like I don't even know how you sort of why would they want to race? Like they should probably consider taking the next few races off because what is that going to look like? They were a distant last. And again, you mentioned it. Logan Sargent had issues. Valtteri Bottas had once again the longest pit stop in the history of pit stops. I mean, that's what it took for them to sort of leapfrog the other and yeah, accidents and sort of getting together. Like that's what I mean. Why are they even showing up? Like you should just
The problem is they're even further behind than they were last year. So and right now there's a worry that they won't even get to that level.
they're not
They
gonna
was
get there. They're not gonna get there. Like what do we have going for them that makes us feel like wow, they're actually yeah, again, they're going to be far behind Haas. I have more optimistic feelings about Haas having seen that race than I did for them. And And this is just the exact opposite. Like I don't know what Alpine's decided to do. They've just created a mess of epic proportions, and this will take years. If
Exactly, and this is the thing. This is a classic. This is what Ferrari usually do, but they don't normally implode the way that Alpine have.
again with the Ferrari accusations. Again, there you go.
This is what
We don't
has
do it that
happened.
way. We don't do it this way. We've never been at the back of the grid
Yeah,
this way.
of course you do. It's just that I'm sure L'Equipe isn't quite
Oh,
as vocal as Gazzetto dello Sport about the French national team, as it were. But but
goodness.
but this is a classic case of upper management interfering with the running of the race team. Classic, classic.
I don't
Despite what Bruno Famin was saying at launch,
look.
clearly
There's
there's a
hope.
there's a problem with with management here, and a problem with the way that the team is being run. People just cannot see light at the end of the tunnel, and they're leaving. They
Actually,
are
you know what?
voting with their feet.
I just thought about this. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
Andretti, go on, say it.
No, I mean, of course, that would require a sale, but Alpine's not going to do it. They're a works car. Get Gunther Steiner. There you go. Solved. Issue solved. All of a sudden, everyone's interested in Alpine again.
Sure, but are they interested in working at
No,
Alpine?
but that I mean, okay, but look, we know now this is when stuff like this happens, this requires a total reset, right? Like I feel I mean, everything should be there should be a reset button. You just hit a reset button and then everything happens. And look, they're done. There's no chance this year. There's no chance next year. There's no chance the year. This is they have to wait until 28. Like that's what they have to really. This is realistically the goal. But again, I mean, look at what they're doing. I just don't even know how to diagnose that issue, how to analyze it. There's just I don't understand. It is head scratching, and no one apparently is able to talk about it intelligently. It is just so bad. It's so
Yeah, and yeah, I mean the other side of this is that they are currently the most anonymous team. Like even their livery is completely pared back because they're overweight, and
how does that
there's
happen? How do
there's
you
just
show up and 2 years into this? How do you show up to a season like this? I don't understand. Like I don't get it. I just don't.
it's yeah
I would
it's
rather they make the fastest engine they could and let it explode 5 laps into it. Like that would at least you would enjoy the first
they,
5 laps.
they they tried that though. They tried that, didn't they? They tried
Do it
to
again.
do that in 2014. But they in 2014, let's face it, they had a slow engine that was unreliable. That's probably even worse. Uh,
This makes you wonder how good Red Bull could have been, right? The years that they used the Renault engine, like had they not been using that, it does really kind of question some of those things. But good God, that is a case in mismanagement of epic
Yeah,
proportions, really.
yeah, absolutely. And it does not befit a works team in Formula One, right? This is not how a works team should be operating. It is awful. Alpine, Alpine, come on, get it together.
It is just crazy. There was one other story that really caught my eye, which is the other Red Bull team, the RB team. Did you get a chance to see what happened there? What'd you
Oh,
think?
Yuki.
Well,
Come on. Look, okay. First of all, let me just caveat this, right? I think Yuki did amazingly. Like
was a good race.
he out qualified Daniel Ricciardo, his more experienced teammate, which it's what I was expecting, but maybe not what you were expecting. And the reason that he was where he was, slower than Daniel Ricciardo and being asked to move aside was not really his fault. It was a strategy error. So
Yeah,
I can understand him feeling a bit aggrieved at having to move over, but mate, come on, like you're not seven, and this is the kind of thing that makes you think that actually Yuki
that's it.
hasn't matured
That's
in
just
3 seasons. You know, he should definitely
look.
be acting in a different way when these situations come up. Um, and what he did at the end of the race was inexcusable,
It
man.
is.
Like, it's just inexcusable. Like we berated Sebastian Vettel. Do you remember doing that in Azerbaijan in 2017?
Yeah,
Um,
this
was
was
it 2018? I can't remember.
no, it was 2017. Yeah,
17, yeah. This was, similar levels of hot-headedness.
Yeah, but I mean
This
that was with an opponent. This is with your own teammate.
own
Like, I mean,
teammate.
this is
Exactly. What's the debrief going to be? And Ricardo basically brushed it aside at the end, didn't he? He was very diplomatic about it and said, "No, it's just Yuki." But
I think that
mate,
with that act in just by itself, I think he might have talked himself out of a career future in Formula One. I cannot see him being upgraded to the Red Bull seat. You really have to look around and see if they would be interested, anyone else would be interested in his services because he doesn't
yeah.
he is really fast. He's really good, but would he be the kind of guy to help lead a team in any way? I don't know. I mean,
But
if
he
yeah,
was. This is the problem. So when De Vries was doing what he was doing last season, Yuki really did pull up his socks and got down to work, knuckled down and did the job. And he did it when Liam Lawson was there, and he did it when Ricardo was there. He can lead the team, but not when he's acting like this. My problem with him, right, is that this isn't affecting his chances of a Red Bull drive. I don't think that's going to happen. It's more about potentially what happens at Aston Martin come 2026. They're going to have Honda power unit. Honda are already involved in Yuki's career, and there's an argument that says that the reason that he's been kept on as long as he has, um, and given the chances that he has in the notoriously picky
yeah, Honda.
junior Red Bull team is because of Honda. So if he wants to keep them on side, he can't do this.
Yeah, I mean the only and I might have overreacted to it. It is a long season, but I mean I get that you're frustrated, right? But to do that, and that was inches away from looking like a disaster. Like you see those two RB teams come in and crash together. I mean, listen, we would have had a field day with that. All the Visa slogans that we could have put together on that would have been just epic. Would have been epic seeing. Not that I wish that anyone gets hurt and anything like that. I probably wouldn't have been at high speeds anyway, but it that is just that um I get your frustration and you can say all kinds of things on team radio. You might even throw your helmet and do all those kind of shenanigans. It's all good, but
Yeah, don't
why
start
do that?
dicing with the
It
cars.
just makes no sense. So
Agreed.
that was pretty odd. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, overall, so I do want to, can we spend a few minutes on this because one of the things that I have been engaged in, thanks to you, is indulging in a lot of discourse on what Formula One has become on in the social media sphere. And I have to say that I have been back and forth with quite a few people. Shout out to Dr. Obbs, by the way, he was very kind. We went in a very healthy back and forth with much respect. So I didn't want to do that. But one of the things that has disappointed me in seeing a lot of the discourse is these two fractions of Formula One fans, right? The people like us who love the sport no matter what, even if it were upside down, the other way around, whatever, we would watch it no matter what. And then all the new fans that are coming in and complaining about, oh, well, look at this and why this yet another boring season. We already know who the winner is. And what I just wanted to say to people like us, right, that are talking down to the new fans is to just sort of put a friendly request out there to not do that, really. And there's no other reason, right? Like I get it that every response I've seen to a complaint about the season boring has been some form of, well, you didn't see the Hamilton years, and you didn't see how Nigel Mansell dominated, and you didn't see how so and so did something, and that is correct, but it's not fair. Like
It's missing the point. It's
it's
completely
missing
missing
the
the point.
point. As a sport, Formula One has decided to invite new fans. That's why you went out and did Drive to Survive. That's why you're having 24 races in a year. Good God, at some stage we'll be having 52 races in a year because there are 52 weekends. I mean, it's, it is not something that people have just sort of come about on their own. Like you have gone to actively make that happen. And oh, by the way, we've also benefited from the amount of content that's out there, the work that we're doing here and others are doing. We wouldn't have been able to do this in any sort of enjoyable way had there not been these new fans. And so I'm really disappointed by that. What I've heard about constantly is that, well, I mean, if you take out the sort of the question of who's going to win this race, a lot of this is going to be interesting to you. I mean, that seems to be the response. And you know how ridiculous that sounds? It might be true, but it sounds ridiculous that you would tell people, "Hey, come on, let's go watch this soccer game, right? Manchester United's going to win, but let's just watch it for the heck of it anyway." Who's going to actually want to watch it?
Yeah.
And particularly when they're dominating, where it's like being up 5-0 within 5 minutes of the match starting. Like that's what this is like. So I would just say, if there are people complaining about it, let's not get on them. You want that. They're caring for the sports. That's why they're talking about it. What do you want them to go? Just go away? So that would be my only request to the folks out there. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
No, I think it's very well said, Amar. I agree. Gatekeeping is a big problem in Formula One, and and the spectacle over the last season and now looking like all of 2024 as well has been a little bit lacking. My sort of problem with it is the way that basically Red Bull have been gaslit, like it's their fault that this has happened. Um, and just some of the things we have covered in our previous video about Red Bull ruining F1, which spoiler, that's not our conclusion.
That's not our
Uh,
conclusion.
uh, but uh, but there's been a lot of discourse in on social media about, well, the FIA came up with all of these ways to peg back Mercedes during their dominant years. Well, sure, they did, but Mercedes still kept on winning. The only time they didn't was by accident with the floor rule changes in 2021. But it was an accident. Um, and there isn't really anything that you can take off the Red Bull and say this is the thing that's causing them that's making them faster. You can't see their flaw. That's the biggest performance differentiator. And to all intents and purposes, we don't know that they're doing anything illegal. It's just more complex and more sophisticated than everybody else's. How do you ban their flaw?
You can't.
If someone can tell me how they can ban Red Bull's flaw, I'm happy to listen.
Yeah.
The problem here is that the other teams just haven't done a good enough job, and they've had the opportunity to do it. The way I see this is that Red Bull have turned up to 2024 with a car for the third season of a rule set, whereas everybody else has turned up with a car for the first season of that rule set because they've been wandering off into the weeds for the first two seasons, doing the wrong thing. And you also can't blame it on Red Bull when the other nine teams have had more wind tunnel, more CFD time. They've been given the advantage to use more resources than Red Bull have, and they still haven't been able to do it. So what do you want? You can't take away from Red Bull when you're already giving it to everybody else, and they're not making use of the tools that are available to them. I'm sorry, but it's
No,
just
no,
not there.
you're absolutely correct. I mean, and
But I absolutely agree that the spectacle has taken a pummeling over the last season. And it isn't fair for us as armchair enthusiasts to sit here and say, well, we've had to put up with this for the last 30 years. You have to as well. That's just not the way to play the game. There has to be a sensible engagement in that conversation. I agree. And gatekeeping is not the way.
it kind of reminds me of what Karun Chandok said, right? Was it last year or maybe I can't
Ah,
remember where he
yeah.
just basically said something to the effect of, "Well, then don't come." And it's
Don't,
like, okay, that's fine, don't come, but then you're not going to have 24 races. You're not going to be able to trot out your drivers with NFL style introductions and basketball style introductions and hoist them on top of whatever
yeah,
those things were
I
at
agree.
Vegas and all of that. Like we shouldn't be doing that, right?
I agree.
And I
Probably the
think
most
it's
unhelpful comment that has come out
exactly.
of Formula One in the last two
It
seasons. Horrible.
it has been very much disappointing to see that, and I would want more people to complain because they care, and that's fine to do so. And I don't. We've talked about this, right? Don't tinker with the sport just to make it a spectacle, but keep in mind that you, as a sport, and I'm talking to you, Formula One, has set a benchmark to have this, and so now you have to find a way to sustain it. We can't just keep saying that, oh, this is the way it's always been. Well, no, this is not the way it was always been because there hasn't been this much discourse about it publicly available and consumable as it has now. There wasn't a drive to survive behind the scenes thing. There wasn't broadcasting in many different things that I see Formula One announcing every day. There's this broadcaster announcing or licensing the product exclusively in this country. And here in the US, ESPN has set up a bunch of different shows. The three races that are being held in the United States are being broadcast on major television networks, not ESPN. So what do you think people are going to look at when, the Austin Grand Prix and the Miami Grand Prix, or the Miami's one is going to come up here in a couple months, right? What is that going to look like? And I think it's fair for fans to ask, why isn't it more competitive? And I think you're right. The other teams have to figure it out. The one thing I would say that has been thrown out as an idea that you might consider is maybe doing the same thing with the cost cap that you're doing with the sort of the testing, the wind tunnel program, which is again to have a sliding scale for cost cap budget.
The problem with that though is that it means that the teams further down the grid will get more money, but they don't have that money because
That's fine.
We're trying to peg but then it doesn't actually change the competitive order, really. It would only help the teams right at the top of the grid. I have a fundamental issue with that.
Okay.
But it's probably a conversation for another day. Yeah, definitely a bookmark for that one.
Yeah.
Cool. So on that bombshell, time to go, I think. We've got another race this weekend. And I'm sure there'll be an ongoing saga at the front of the grid, but hopefully we'll have an enjoyable race to sink our teeth into as well. Until then, see you later.
See ya.